Hello, my name's George English, the Director of Research Through People. So this is another of our videos about people who come from a certain place, in this case Birmingham and the counties around there known as the West Midlands. So we want to bring to life what it may be like for your ancestors if they lived there or if you visit there now, and share some of the examples of people who had ancestors from there. So Birmingham, the second largest British city after London, very much grew during the Industrial Revolution, became the first manufacturing town in the world. And there's all sorts of famous people, Bolton, Watt and Murdoch, who did things that affect our lives today. The first working steam engine, more canals than Venice. Going back to 1768, canals were there before the railways and were of course a key part of transport. Various other things, the Bullring shopping centre, one of the largest shopping centres now in Europe. Cadbury's chocolate, a lot of people can tell you about that. Famous for jewellery. Lord of the Rings, the Shire was based on a village south of Birmingham, and it had the first football league. Test cricket is played at Edgbaston, and I could go on a long time. So here we have a map of Birmingham, and you can see the yellow area there, Birmingham. Then it's surrounded by a number of very significant towns and cities: Coventry, Wolverhampton, and going further to the north, Staffordshire, Warwickshire, and various other counties that make up the West Midlands. So one of the interesting things is that Tolkien, when he wrote the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits, they lived in the Shire, in Middle Earth, in the book, but in fact it was based on the village of Sarehole, which is just to the south side of Birmingham. So if you're a fan, when you come here you can go and visit Sarehole and see that he grew up in these areas and very much based the story on some of the things he saw as a child. So the first case we're going to look at is the Shirts. So here we are. He's born 1944 in Birmingham during the Second World War, and his father Daniel was from Aston on the north side of Birmingham. His mother had actually come from Northamptonshire. They married in Castle Bromwich near Birmingham in 1942. Now it's a bit of a sad story. In fact, Daniel had been married beforehand to Linda, who was born in West Bromwich on the northwest side of Birmingham, but she'd actually died at the age of 28. And then obviously Daniel had remarried. Well, let's look at this in a bit more detail. Now, one of the sources of information that's become available in the last couple of years is the 1939 register. Census typically is not released till 100 years out. So this register was done just as the Second World War was building up and can be so useful, because here we have Daniel and wife Linda living in Wheeler's Lane on the south side of Birmingham, and it tells us what he does: electrical testing engineer, gives us his exact date of birth as hers and so on. Now, interestingly enough, his father was also in the 1939 register, so here we have another Daniel, slightly different initials, but he's born 1872. By this time he's well into his 60s. He's also an electrical testing engineer, and there's his wife Ada and their daughter Evelyn living with them. So let's have a look at where the Shirts lived, and this is just a quick map for you to have a feel. There's Birmingham itself. You can see to the northwest, West Bromwich, to the northeast, Castle Bromwich, Wheeler's Lane almost due south of Birmingham, and Solihull. Now you see down there Sarehole, where the Hobbits came from. That's where that is. And I'm going to talk in a moment about the Eagles family, and you can see Edgbaston, Derryton, Bortley. So we've got situations where people lived in Birmingham itself, but also in the areas around there. So back to the Shirts. Now, in fact, Daniel Shirt's father, also Daniel, came from Stepney, and both of them were electrical testing engineers, as we've seen in the 1939 register. And in fact, James Shirt, there we are back to 1850, was born in Stepney, died in Australia. And there's some very interesting stories in this family. James Shirt emigrated to Australia. And interestingly enough, when he died, he knew that his son Daniel was still in the UK, but the Australian family had lost touch, so he was mentioned in the will, but they weren't able to make contact and for him to receive what had been left to him. Now, another little thing, old photos are so useful. Now here we are, we found a photo in the 19th century, quite special. can't see a lot, can you? But here's James Shirt with his wife Elizabeth and son Daniel, just about age 12 at that stage. So starting to bring a family to life. And although they came from Warwickshire originally, in this case, there's other stories that go in. So the Eagles, let's look at this in a bit more detail. Let's go back in time. George Eagles, born almost 200 years ago. His dad's born in Birmingham in 1804. His mum, Sarah's, born on the south side of Birmingham. And they marry in Edgbaston, again on the southwest side of Birmingham, where the cricket is played. Now, James's father, John, was born in St Martin's, Birmingham, and died in Bawdsley. Married Sarah Shaddock, St Martin. Now, I picked this example because we've got an interesting combination of the old and the new. St Martin's was very much in the centre of Birmingham. We're going to look at that in a moment. Now, James Eagles became a brass founder. Very much one of those things that happened in the Industrial Revolution. We see actually he went down to London, an interesting thing. But let's come and look in a bit more detail. There's James's birth. Before the 1830s, 1839 in England, records were kept separately in registers. So here we are, the register of his birth. You can see John and Sarah Eagles of Birmingham, his parents. So he's born 25th of June. This actually was the baptism register. He's baptised, what's that, about 5 months later in November. Now, I mentioned St Martin's is in the centre of Birmingham. Now look at this. There's the old church of St Martin, and it's surrounded by the famous now shopping centre of the Bullring. Amazing building on the right here is Selfridges. So we very much have a mixture of the old and the new, and if your ancestors came from there, you can visit St Martin's, but you could also do some shopping and some modern things as well. Why is it called the Bullring? A frequent question. And in fact, way back in the 16th century, John Cooper was given the right to bait bulls near the church, and that story has lived on through the Bullring. So now let's look at the Thurmans. Now here we are back in the 18th century. Joseph was born in Over Whittaker on the east side of Birmingham. There's William, born in Tipton in Staffordshire, and Eliza as well. That's about 10 miles to the northwest of Birmingham. Oh, Tipton, very much a family from Tipton. And they stayed there, and again they stayed there particularly because of the Industrial Revolution and the jobs that it provided. And we can see here, Joseph was a labourer. He may well have been an ironworks labourer as well, but there, William works in the ironworks, Thomas works in the ironworks, and Tipton was very famous for its ironworks. Now, let's look at that as a job in a moment. But here's Tipton, and you can see the places where they lived. Brick Kiln Street, some fairly descriptive names of roads, Church Lane and so on. Fairly close area. Again, very common in those days to not move very far. And here we're working in an ironworks, charging a blast furnace. You can imagine how hot that job was, and doing that all day, etc. But this is what our ancestors did very often, and that's what we research for, that's what we try and find out, so we can bring your ancestors to life. So we made a lot of these videos, all sorts of other places in England. So we've got one on London, got one on Lancashire. If you're from Scotland, you've got videos on Scotland and places there, and Wales. Surnames we found are very interesting for people, and so we've got a lot of videos on surnames. What would it be like if we do research for them? So we made a special video with 3 couples talking about what they got out of having their ancestors researched. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you found that interesting. Please get in touch. What we do, we have a free consultation because we don't know what we're going to do for you and what it may cost. We have a look when you send us brief details, and then we come back to you with the options that we suggest and the costs involved in that. As I say, there are lots of videos on YouTube. Just search for Research Through People. There's an email address to get in touch, info@researchthroughpeople.com. Give us a ring if you want. There's a phone number. So look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.